The air in the underground chamber was stale, thick with the scent of rusted metal, oil, and old blood. It pressed in on Princess Silvara's skin like an invisible weight, but she remained still, composed. Her wrists bore raw marks from the restraint cuffs, and her long silver hair, once braided in ceremonial Zovari coils, was tangled and matted, left to fall across her shoulders like a banner of disgrace. Even so, her back stayed straight, her violet eyes sharp and unflinching. The Tao, humans thought they'd won something by capturing her, that this moment, her sitting in chains, was a victory. They didn't understand what it meant to be Zovari. Footsteps approached, heavy, measured, the gait of someone who knew how to move through shadows. She turned her head slowly toward the doorway as a man stepped into the room, Raylan Voss. She'd seen him once before, on a cracked datapad during a Zovari intelligence briefing, the rebel leader who'd become a symbol of Earth's final, sputtering resistance. She hadn't paid him. Much mind, then. Just another human willing to die for a doomed cause. Now, he stood before her in the flesh, taller than she expected. His dark hair was damp from sweat or rain, plastered against his forehead. His jaw was rough with stubble, and his sleeveless vest revealed a body hardened by years of survival, lean muscle wrapped in faded scars. But it was his eyes that struck her most. Icy gray, steady, eyes that had seen far too much and kept going anyway. "You're surprisingly calm for someone in chains," he said, his voice rough, yet not unkind. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. Silvara tilted her chin up. "I was born into chains. These are nothing." Raylan studied her for a moment longer before walking to the table at the far end of the room. He didn't offer food or water, didn't ask questions. He just stood there, arms crossed, watching her like a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. She wasn't what he expected. That much was obvious. "You don't act like a prisoner," he said eventually. "And you don't act like a conqueror." That earned her the ghost of a smile. "We didn't conquer anything. You did. Your people, your empire." Silvara didn't rise to the bait. She could have thrown his own propaganda back at him, could have cited Zovari law, honor, history. But what was the point? His mind was made up. He saw her as a symbol of everything his kind had lost, and perhaps he was right. She'd never touched the ground of Earth until her shuttle was shot down 2 nights ago. Never seen its trees or breathed its air. Yet she wore its conquest like a medal on her uniform. Now, her armor was gone. She wore only a torn flight suit, stripped of insignia, stained with soot and blood. Royalty reduced to a bargaining chip. But she was still alive. And she had no intention of staying in this cell forever. Raylan finally spoke again. "You were headed back to orbit when we caught you." "Heading home?" "Back to the fleet," she said simply. "To report. To command. To end this war." He scoffed, and she watched a muscle twitch in his jaw. It's not a war when only one side is still fighting. She wanted to argue, but again, pointless. He would believe what he needed to. He was a human. Humans believed in impossible odds in winning battles long after they were lost. It was reckless, stupid, admirable. He turned to leave. "You'll regret keeping me alive," she said. Raylan paused in the doorway, glancing over his shoulder. "If I wanted you dead, Princess, I would have buried you in the crater where we found your wreckage." The door closed behind him with a soft hiss. She exhaled and leaned back against the wall, staring up at the flickering ceiling light. The silence returned, wrapping around her like a second chain. 3 days passed. The rebels didn't speak to her. They brought her food, water, no threats, no interrogations, just silence. It was unsettling. The only face she saw consistently was Raylan's. He didn't visit often, once a day at most, but when he did, he always watched her the same way. Not like a prisoner, not like royalty, like a person. That was somehow worse. On the 4th day, something changed. He entered the room carrying something small and metallic. She stiffened slightly as he crouched in front of her, holding up the object between two fingers. A shackle key. I'm taking these off, he said, quiet but firm. Why? Because chains break people. You don't seem the type who breaks easy. His mouth twitched into something that might have been humor. And we both know if you were going to kill me, you'd have done it by now. She let him unlock the restraints. The click of metal releasing made her throat tighten in a way she didn't expect. Her arms dropped to her lap, sore and numb, and for the first time she flexed her fingers freely. He stood. You're not a prisoner anymore, Raylan said. But don't mistake that for freedom. She rose slowly to her feet, her legs shaky, but she didn't let it show. What am I then? Something worse, he said. A problem. There was no triumph in his voice, no cruelty, just truth. The rebel hideout was hidden deep within the ruins of a collapsed city, an old subway station reinforced with scavenged steel and solar rigs. It was crude but functional. As Raylan led her through the corridors, rebels stared, some with curiosity, others with hatred. One reached for his weapon, only to freeze at a single look from their commander. They didn't speak to her, but they didn't attack her either. Not yet. Raylan gave her a corner of the bunker to sleep in, a thin mattress, a water pack, a blanket that still smelled faintly of oil and sand. She didn't thank him. He didn't expect her to. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat with her back to the wall, eyes open, listening to the breathing of strangers. Her people would come for her. She knew it. But what worried her more than being found was that a part of her didn't want to be. The next night, the sky fell. It started with a sound, distant thunder, rhythmic, mechanical. Then a flash, bright enough to burn blue against the ceiling. Raylan burst into her corner seconds later. They're here. She was already on her feet. Gunfire echoed through the tunnels. Screams. The bark of orders in human tongues and the sharp, guttural commands of Zovari soldiers. They reached the armory first. Raylan threw her a sidearm, then pulled open a hatch in the floor. She stared at him. You're helping me escape? You want to die in a collapsing tunnel? A beat of hesitation. She didn't trust him, but she ran anyway. The underground exploded behind them. They emerged into the ruins of the city. Above, broken skyscrapers clawing at the clouds, streets overtaken by nature and time. Raylan moved like he knew every alley, every broken path. She kept pace, her blood roaring in her ears. When they finally stopped, it was inside the skeletal remains of a pre-invasion building, concrete and glass long reduced to rubble. He collapsed, against a wall, breathing hard, covered in dust and ash. She sat across from him, staring. You could have let me die, she said. You could have shot me just now. Funny how that works. They sat in silence. She didn't want to admit the truth, not even to herself, but she was starting to understand something terrifying. This human, this rebel, this defiant spark in the ashes of his world. He wasn't just her enemy anymore. He was the first person who ever looked at her and didn't see a title, or a weapon, or a prize, and worse, she didn't hate him for it. They didn't speak as dawn broke through the cracks in the ruined skyline, painting the broken concrete and shattered glass with streaks of gold. Silvara sat with her knees drawn up, arms wrapped around them, eyes closed. But she wasn't sleeping. She didn't trust this world to let her rest, not the planet, not the rebels, and not Raylan Voss, no matter how many times he didn't kill her. He crouched at the edge of the building, scanning the horizon with a battered pair of binoculars. His weapon lay within easy reach, though he didn't seem tense, just watchful. She found herself watching him more than the street below, as if trying to decipher some riddle hidden in the rough set of his jaw, or the quiet patience in his movements. They'd been in the open too long. How far to your next hideout? She asked, her voice quiet, breaking the silence between them. He glanced back, surprised that she'd spoken at all. There isn't one. She lifted a brow. You didn't plan for extraction? Didn't think I'd be dragging the Zovari air across half the ruins of New Europa either, he muttered, lowering the binoculars. Plans changed. That's what happens when you take hostages, she replied coolly. I didn't take you, he said. You chose to run with me. She hated that he was right, and she hated even more the heat curling in her stomach every time his eyes lingered just a second too long. He hadn't tried anything. Not a single touch, not a suggestive word. But something passed between them in every glance, every silence. She stood, brushing dust from her pants, ignoring the twinge in her shoulder. The fall from her shuttle had left her bruised, and days in chains hadn't helped. Her body was recovering, but something else, something deeper, was unraveling. He didn't treat her like royalty. Not like an enemy either. With the rebels, it was always one or the other. They feared her, or they despised her. Raylan. He just looked at her like a person, and it was slowly driving her mad. They moved quickly through the skeletal remains of the city, weaving through fallen towers and twisted steel. The Zovari patrols hadn't caught up to them yet, but she could feel them closing in. The sky was quiet for now, but the Empire wouldn't let her go for long. Her blood was too valuable. She caught Raylan watching her as they paused in the shade of an overgrown archway, vines clawing at stone like nature trying to take back what the war hadn't. She didn't say anything at first, just stared back until the silence grew thick. What? He shrugged one shoulder. Just thinking. About what? His eyes met hers. How strange this is. Her throat tightened. Strange how? That you're here. That I'm not dead. That we're talking like... He trailed off. Like, we're not supposed to be enemies? She finished, voice softer than she meant. He nodded slowly. She looked away. The war changed everything. No, he said, stepping closer. The war revealed everything. She turned sharply, heat flashing in her chest. Don't pretend you understand me, Raylan. You don't know what it's like, growing up in a world where duty is everything, where your name is a weapon before you even learn to speak. His expression didn't change, but she saw something flicker behind his eyes, something she hadn't expected. I do know, he said quietly. She scoffed. You're a rebel, a criminal in your own system. Before that, I was a soldier, drafted at 15, promised a future if I bled for someone else's cause. My brother died in the first month, my mother in the third. And after a while, you stop being a person. You're just another number in a file, another target to send out into the storm. Her mouth opened, then closed. She hadn't known that. No one had ever told her what the humans were before the rebellion. Her training made them sound like creatures, primitive, angry, defiant. But in this moment, Raylan wasn't a creature. He was a man, and he was bleeding just like she was. He took a slow breath. You think I fight because I hate your kind? I fight because I remember what it felt like to be free. She didn't know why it hurt so much to hear that. Maybe because she wasn't free. Not really. Not since she was born. For all her status, all her power, she had always been in a cage made of expectations and command. And in this crumbling world, this rebel leader, scarred and fierce and utterly human, had shown her more truth than anyone in the Empire ever had. She stepped past him without a word, and they walked in silence for hours. By nightfall, they found shelter in the remains of a collapsed museum. The upper floors had caved in, but the basement was intact. Dust-covered statues loomed in the dark, ancient human artifacts preserved in the wreckage. A marble woman with her arms outstretched stood at the center, bathed in moonlight. Silvara brushed her fingers across the cracked stone and wondered what the statue had once meant. Raylan knelt near the wall, setting up a small energy flare. He kept glancing at her like he wanted to say something. She ignored it until it became impossible. What? She said finally. He rubbed the back of his neck. I've got a contact, someone who can get us off the radar. They owe me. Then we should go. It's risky. They're a smuggler, and they don't like surprises. She smirked faintly. Neither do I. He stared at her then, long and full. And then very quietly he said, You could still turn yourself in. Signal your people. I know you're carrying a biochip even if it's dormant. Her smile faded. I could, she said, but I won't. Why? She didn't answer right away. She walked over to him slowly, until they were standing, toe to toe in the half-dark. I don't know what this is, she said. I don't know why I didn't run when I had the chance, but every time I look at you, I remember that I don't belong to them anymore. Not the way they want me to. Raylan's throat moved with a swallow. And what do you belong to now? I don't know, she whispered. Then he kissed her. It wasn't soft. It wasn't careful. It was raw, desperate, the kind of kiss born from fire and loss and unspoken truths. She leaned into it like she was falling, fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt, and when he pulled her closer, she didn't resist. They broke apart only when breath became impossible. She touched her forehead to his, eyes closed. I'm still your enemy, she murmured. Not tonight. He didn't touch her again after that. Didn't try to take more than what she had given. They lay side by side on the cold museum floor, backs against the wall, the world beyond the rubble forgotten for a little while. She drifted off to the sound of his breathing. It was the first night she'd slept in peace since landing on Earth. They left the museum before dawn. The sky was a pale bruise of violet and silver, clouds dragging low like torn cloth. Silvara walked beside Raylan in silence, her hand brushing his only once as they crossed a collapsed bridge, the gesture small, but electric. Neither spoke of the night before, not the kiss, not the quiet surrender beneath shattered marble and memory. It hung between them like a secret. Too fragile to speak, too heavy to forget. Their path wound through old transit tunnels and overgrown industrial zones. Raylan knew the terrain like it was etched into his bones, taking them through routes no drone would scan, no patrol would think to search. Silvera kept pace without complaint, her eyes sharp, her body moving with a warrior's efficiency. She could still feel the place where he'd touched her, his mouth, his hands, the warmth of his breath against her throat. It should have felt like weakness, but nothing had ever felt more like strength. Tell me about your contact, she said as they passed through the remains of a security checkpoint, crushed barriers half buried in roots. Name's Dren, Raylan said. Smuggler. Mostly runs cargo for whoever pays the most. He doesn't like the Empire, but he's not a rebel either. Just greedy. And he'll help us. Raylan hesitated. He owes me. That's enough. She didn't ask what the debt was. If Raylan said it was enough, then it was. That realization startled her. She didn't remember the last time she trusted someone's word without verification. They reached Dren's compound by midday, a cluster of prefab structures built into the side of a rocky hill, half camouflaged by natural terrain and cloaked sensor jammers. A shield shimmered faintly across the entry gate as they approached, and Silvara instinctively reached for her weapon. Raylan touched her wrist gently. Careful, he's jumpy. A voice crackled over the speaker embedded in the wall. You better be bringing booze or bodies, Voss. Raylan stepped into the open. I'm bringing something better, a deal. The shield lowered with a flicker, and the gates unlatched with a groan of rusted servos. Silvara followed Raylan through the entrance, eyes narrowing as half a dozen armed figures stepped into view. Grizzled men and women, wearing mismatched armor and the hard expressions of people who'd seen too much. From the center of the group stepped a man with two cybernetic eyes and a smirk like oil slick over ice. Dren. Well, well, he said, grinning wide. Didn't expect to see your ugly mug again. Raylan didn't return the smile. I need transport. Dren's eyes shifted to Silvara, and his grin widened. Now that, he said slowly, is interesting. Silvara felt the attention like a burn and straightened, meeting his gaze without flinching. She's off limits, Raylan said. Dren barked a laugh. Not even a hello and already making rules? Relax, I'm not into royalty. Too many sharp teeth. He waved them inside, and the group dispersed with practiced indifference. The interior was even more disordered than Silvara expected. Scavenged tech, crates of black market gear, half-dismantled drones. It smelled like old metal and danger. They were led to a side room, private, windowless, dimly lit. Raylan stood by the entrance, arms crossed, while Silvara moved to study the glowing holomap flickering on the wall. Dren tossed a bottle of something thick and amber onto the table. "So, what's the job?" "We need out of the city," Raylan said. "And we need it quiet." Dren raised an eyebrow. "And where are we going?" "North," Raylan said. "Toward the resistance line." Dren leaned back in his chair. "That's a lot of risk, especially with your girlfriend here glowing like a damn beacon." "She's not—" Raylan started, but Silvara cut in, voice cold and sharp. "I'm not a passenger," she said. "I can fight." Dren eyed her, then looked to Raylan again. "This one's got claws." "You have no idea," Raylan said, under his breath. Dren considered for a moment, tapping his fingers against the bottle. Then he nodded. "All right, I'll run you to the perimeter, but it's gonna cost." Raylan stepped forward, placing a small data chip on the table. "Everything I've got." Dren picked it up, scanned it, and whistled. "You really do want out?" Raylan didn't answer. Dren chuckled. "You've changed, Voss. I remember when you used to shoot first, talk second." Raylan's eyes flicked to Silvara. "Maybe I had the wrong people around me." Dren caught the glance, smirked again, and stood. "We leave in 3 hours, don't make me regret this." They were given quarters in the back, a shared room, one bed, peeling walls. Silvara sat on the edge of the mattress as Raylan closed, the door behind them. The silence stretched between them until the air grew too thick to breathe. "You trust him?" she asked. "No." "Then why?" "Because I don't have a choice." She looked at him. "Neither do I." Their eyes met, and something wordless passed between them again. The kiss from the night before still lingered, half forgotten but fully felt. He stepped toward her slowly, and she stood to meet him. "I don't know what this is," he said, voice low. "But it's not a lie." She touched his chest, right over his heart. "No, it's not." They didn't speak again, not as their mouths met, not as her fingers tangled in his hair, not as he laid her down and the world beyond the thin metal walls disappeared entirely. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't rushed. It was fierce, full of breathless need and something far more dangerous, tenderness. After they lay tangled in silence, the echo of their bodies still humming in the air. "Do you regret it?" he asked into her hair. She shook her head. "Do you?" "No." But the moment shattered with the sound of a door slamming open outside. Raylan was up instantly, grabbing his weapon. Silvara followed, pulse spiking. They barely had time to move when Dren's voice rang out over the intercom. "Sorry, Voss," it said, "but her bounty's worth more than your freedom." The betrayal cracked through her like lightning. Raylan swore and pulled her behind the wall as plasma fire erupted in the hallway. Silvara grabbed a pistol from the table and returned fire without hesitation, dropping one of Dren's mercs as he stormed through the door. "Back exit!" Raylan shouted, blasting another. They ran. Through winding halls, dodging fire, slipping between crates and gear as the compound erupted into chaos. Dren had called in the Empire. Silvara could feel it in her bones, the low thrum of a Zovari gunship descending, the shift in the air as their patrols arrived. She and Raylan burst into the landing bay just as the ship doors opened. Zovari soldiers poured out. Black armor, curved rifles, precise formation. Silvara froze. At their front stood Commander Velrix, her former trainer, her father's blade. The moment he saw her, his face twisted in surprise and fury. "Princess!" he barked. "Step away from the human." Raylan raised his weapon, but Silvara grabbed his wrist. "No," she said. "Not yet." Velrix stepped forward. "You've been compromised. The human has infected your judgment. Stand down and return to the fleet. You will not be harmed." She looked at Raylan, then back at Velrix. "No," she said clearly. "You're a Zovari," Velrix snapped. "I was," she said. "Now I'm more." Velrix's lip curled. Then you are nothing. Raylan stepped beside her, weapon raised. She's not alone. The first shot came from the rebels. The firefight tore the hangar apart. Silvara moved with terrifying precision, dropping her former kin one by one, her heart bleeding with every shot but never hesitating. Raylan fought at her side, a wall of fury and skill. They moved as one, covered each other, protected each other. The last of the Zovari fell with a shriek of plasma and blood. Smoke filled the hangar. Dren's body was slumped against the wall, eyes wide with betrayal returned. Silvara collapsed to her knees, breathing hard. Raylan knelt beside her, touching her shoulder. You all right? She nodded, though tears stung her eyes. I killed my own. You survived them. They didn't speak as they stumbled out into the wilderness beyond the compound, the sun setting behind them in a blaze of gold and blood. Together. Still together. And the war, they both knew, was only just beginning. No, she said. I'm walking into your base with the man who freed me, and if you let me speak, I'll tell you exactly how we can win this war. An hour later, they stood in front of the council. It wasn't what Silvara expected. Not some grand chamber or heavily armored tribunal. Just a table, a ring of tired people. Men and women who had lost families, friends, homes. They stared at her like she was a loaded weapon that might fire at any moment. You've got some gall, one of them said, a woman with cybernetic arms and a face lined with age and grief. Showing your alien face here after what your kind did. I understand your anger, Silvara said, voice steady. You should be angry. I was part of the system that hurt you, but I'm not that person anymore. The man beside her leaned forward, eyeing Raylan. And you vouch for her? Raylan nodded. With my life. Silvara glanced at him. The way he said it, without hesitation, without fear, it settled something deep in her chest. Something that had never known peace until now. You said you can help us, the woman said. How? Silvara stepped forward and placed a data crystal on the table. This contains full schematics of the Zovari orbital weapon grids, she said. Locations of their primary strike fleets. Command hierarchy breakdowns. Internal encryption codes. I memorized them when I still held command authority. One of the others leaned forward, inspecting the crystal like it might explode. Why would you give this to us? Because I'm done watching people die for power, she said. I'm done letting cruelty define my species, and because... She looked at Raylan. The man I love believed I could be more than what I was. Raylan blinked, startled. It was the first time she'd said it aloud. The council exchanged glances, whispered among themselves. Finally, the cybernetic woman looked up again. All right, she said. You want to prove you're with us? You'll lead the charge. We hit a Zovari weapons relay tomorrow. You show us what you can do. Silvara nodded. I will. They were given quarters again, more private this time. No bars, no guns pointed at them. Just a quiet room and the weight of what came next. Raylan sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. You said you love me, he said softly. She sat beside him. I meant it. He turned to her. I didn't expect that. Not from you. She smiled faintly. Neither did I. He reached for her hand, laced their fingers together. You're going to lead them into a war. She nodded. I already started one, might as well finish it. He kissed her again that night. Slower, softer. Not out of need, but out of something deeper. Reverence. Gratitude. She sank into him, into the warmth of his skin, into the quiet strength of his presence. In the dark, wrapped around each other, she whispered, I don't know what comes after this. Raylan's hand brushed her back, slow and calming. Then, we find out together. The next morning dawned blood-red and cold. Silvara, suited up in armor pieced together from stolen Zovari plating and resistance tech. It was imperfect, unbalanced. But so was she now, half one thing, half another, something new born in the fire. Raylan stood beside her in full rebel gear. No insignia, no allegiance but the one they shared. The dropship roared to life. As they boarded, the resistance soldiers stared at her with wary awe. Some still looked at her like she was a ticking bomb. Others, with something almost like hope. The target was an orbital uplink tower, one of the key links between Earth's occupation forces and the fleet still hovering in low orbit. If they could take it offline, the rebel factions across the globe would have a window to strike. And if they failed, the Empire would crush them in a single sweep. They landed under fire. The air was thick with smoke and plasma, the tower looming like a metal god above a scarred hill. Silvara led the charge, moving with the kind of precision no human could match. She knew the codes, the defense patterns, the timing of the turrets. Raylan and the rebels covered her, cutting down patrols and pushing through barricades. Inside, the command center. Alarm screamed as she hacked into the mainframe, fingers flying over the interface. 60 seconds, she called out. Raylan dropped beside her, blood on his cheek, eyes wild. We've got company coming in heavy. I just need time, she said, voice calm despite the chaos. He looked at her. Just looked. And something passed between them, again. They were fire. They were storm. They were the broken future reborn. The last firewall gave way. Silvara hit the final command, and the entire tower pulsed with light. The relay lines went dead. A signal shot skyward, scrambled and corrupted, frying the Zovari fleet's connection in one bright blink of rebellion. The tide shifted. Outside, the rebel forces cheered as the sky lit up with the first signs of orbital failure. The fleet, cut off, blind, vulnerable, started to fracture. Raylan caught her as she stumbled back, exhaustion threatening to drag her down. You did it, he whispered. She clutched his collar, pulled him close. No, she whispered back, forehead resting against his. We did. The sky was on fire. Not the blaze of sunlight or the soft glow of dawn, but the furious, desperate burn of falling warships and dying empires. The Zovari fleet above Earth had fractured like glass under pressure, their neural link severed, their hierarchy collapsed. For the first time since the invasion began, humanity had a chance to win, and it started with her. Silvara stood at the edge of the rebel command platform, wind snapping her cloak around her legs. Smoke twisted across the battlefield below. Streaks of plasma fire shattered tanks, broken bodies. Distant explosions rattled the ground. Above it all, the orbital fragments fell in burning arcs, streaking like meteors across the horizon. Behind her, Raylan approached in silence. She felt him before she saw him. His heat, his breath, the steady presence that had become her anchor. They're breaking, he said, voice low. She didn't answer. They've lost command, he went on. Their generals are either dead or cut off. Their troops are panicking. We can push them back all the way to the launch towers. Still, she didn't speak, just stared at the collapsing empire she once served. Does it feel like victory? He asked gently. No, she whispered. It feels like guilt. He stepped beside her, touched her hand. You didn't destroy them, he said. You gave people a chance to fight back. I gave them the map to kill my own kind. He looked at her, eyes steady. You gave them a map to freedom. Silvara turned to face him. His face was bruised, his armor cracked, his knuckles raw. But his eyes still burned with that same stubborn fire that had made her follow him into the impossible. The resistance wants to launch a final assault, he said. Target the last stronghold. They're asking you to lead it. Of course they are, she said softly. They need a symbol. They need you. She looked at him, really looked. And what about you? I'm going wherever you go. Her throat tightened. They left that night. The final stronghold was buried in the frozen wastes of northern Siberia, hidden beneath miles of ice and stone. The Zovari had built it as an insurance policy, a command hub buried so deep, no conventional force could breach it. But Silvara wasn't conventional. Neither was Raylan. And the people who followed them now weren't rebels anymore. They were something else, something new. A united army of humans and defectors, soldiers and civilians, survivors and believers. The world's last hope. As they crossed the frozen plains under the cover of auroras, Silvara found herself standing before a kind of memory, a door not just into the heart of the enemy, but into her own past. She had once trained in this place, had once stood on the command bridge giving orders that wiped out cities. Now she would break its spine. They breached the facility under heavy fire. Automated drones swarmed from the tunnels. Laser cannons erupted from the ice. Explosions shook the mountain, but they pressed forward, Raylan at her side, shouting orders, leading charges, bleeding for every meter gained. The final chamber loomed ahead. A black spire of obsidian alloy pulsed with energy, the neural core still intact. Silvara recognized the architecture instantly. It wasn't just a hub, it was a brain, and somewhere inside it. "She's here," Silvara said, stopping cold. Raylan turned, panting. "Who?" "My mother." He stared at her. "High Matriarch." "Felix," Silvara said. "She's the last command node. If she's alive, she'll be wired into the system. Direct control of every remaining drone on the planet." "And if she's not?" he asked. "Then this ends quickly." They found her in the central chamber, suspended in a vertical stasis chamber, connected by tendrils of neural wiring and black tubing. The once feared matriarch Felix was a shadow of the woman Silvara remembered. Her silver hair floated around her like drifting ice. Her eyes, though dim, still burned with the old contempt. "So," the voice rasped through the speakers. "The traitor comes home." Raylan raised his weapon. Silvara put a hand on his arm. "She's mine." She stepped forward, slow and sure. "You've lost," Silvara said. "The fleet's shattered. Earth is rising. It's over." The matriarch smiled with cracked lips. "No, child," she said. "It's just begun." A surge of energy lit the chamber. The core pulsed red. Alarms screamed. Dozens of drones activated behind them. Silvara spun, shouting, "Raylan, move!" But he was already firing. He took down 3 with clean, brutal precision before one of the machines tackled him. Silvara spun with a war cry and drove her plasma blade through its skull. More came. Too many. And then, chaos, gunfire, sparks, screams. Raylan vanished beneath a swarm of machines. Silvara fought like a demon, her blade dancing through the air. But she couldn't see him, couldn't reach him. A roar tore from her throat. She leapt over the platform, slicing through metal and sparks, pushing toward the core. She had one chance. One way to end this. She reached the control panel and ripped open the casing. Her fingers flew over the interface, decrypting her mother's codes, severing the neural links one by one. The matriarch screamed through the speakers. "You would kill your own blood for this creature?" Silvara didn't stop. "He freed me," she said. "He loved me. Something you never did." The final lock broke. The power core surged, then imploded in a pulse of blinding light. Silence fell. The drones collapsed. The lights dimmed. The stasis chamber cracked. Matriarch Felix fell forward and hit the ground with a sound that echoed like history shattering. Silvara didn't move. She stared at her mother's still form, then turned and ran. "Raylan!" She stumbled over fallen drones, her armor cracked and bleeding. She found him in the wreckage, barely conscious, one arm crushed under metal. "Hey," he murmured when he saw her. "Took you long enough." She fell to her knees beside him, cradling his face. "You idiot," she whispered. "You stupid, reckless. I told you," he rasped. "Wherever you go." She pressed her forehead to his, her voice breaking. "You're not dying here," she said. "Not after everything." "I'm not planning on it," he said. "I still owe you." "Breakfast," she laughed, a choked, messy sound full of too much emotion. "I love you," she whispered. He smiled. "Good. Because I'm yours." They lay there for a moment, just breathing. just alive. The war didn't end that day, but the Empire died. In that facility, what rose in its place was something the galaxy hadn't seen in generations: a planet united. A new order, one built by rebels and traitors, lovers and leaders. Silvera helped rebuild the world. She stood before councils and war tribunals. She testified. She took responsibility. Some wanted her punished. Others wanted her crowned. She accepted neither. "I don't need titles," she said. "I just want peace." Raylan recovered, though not without scars. His right arm would never be the same, but he wore his wounds like medals. They disappeared for a time after that. Traveled the world, helped restore the places the war had broken, built homes, saved children, loved fiercely. People told stories about them. The rebel who fell in love with the enemy, the princess who broke her chains and bound her heart to a human, the love that sparked a revolution. Years later, they stood on a quiet cliffside, overlooking a world healing. Raylan wrapped an arm around her waist. "Do you regret it?" he asked. She leaned into him. "No," she said. "I only regret not breaking the chains sooner." He kissed her temple. "You didn't just break them. You burned them." They stood there, hand in hand, no longer fugitives or soldiers, just two souls who found freedom in each other, and in the ashes of war they built something no empire could ever touch: love.